In 1878, excavators working near Pompeii unearthed a Roman grave. Among the usual funerary offerings, they found a small, intricately carved golden figurine. It wasn't just gold, it was unmistakably pre-Columbian Peruvian, dating back centuries before Columbus. The discovery, seemingly unremarkable at first glance, quickly unraveled into an archaeological conundrum of monumental proportions. Here, buried deep within the stratified layers of ancient Roman history, lay an object that, by all conventional understandings, should not exist. The immediate cognitive dissonance was palpable. How could an artifact from the Nazca culture, originating from the western coast of South America, find its way into a grave near Vesuvius, millennia before the widely acknowledged European voyages across the Atlantic? This wasn't merely an unusual trade item. It was a direct challenge to the established timelines of global interaction and exploration. For generations, the narrative has been clear. Columbus's expeditions in the late 15th century marked the inauguration of sustained contact between Europe and the Americas. Yet this diminutive golden effigy, unearthed from a Roman context, dating back to the 1st century CE, painted a radically different picture, suggesting a transcontinental connection at least 13 centuries prior to the assumed first encounter. Archaeologists and historians alike were confronted with an anomaly so profound it threatened to dismantle foundational tenets of their disciplines. The figurine, crafted with distinctive stylistic elements characteristic of ancient Peruvian craftsmanship, offered no ambiguity in its origin. Its presence in a Roman burial site was not an accidental contamination or a later intrusion. It was embedded within the grave goods, alongside other objects unequivocally Roman, suggesting an intentional placement, an integrated component of the funerary rites. This wasn't just an oddity to be dismissed. It was a direct, tangible piece of evidence demanding a re-evaluation of history itself, forcing a radical reconsideration of who knew whom, when, and how in the ancient world. The very notion of an isolated pre-Columbian Americas was suddenly rendered questionable by this one improbable find. The undeniable provenance of this artifact, a paradox in itself, became the central focus of intense scrutiny. Experts painstakingly identified its origins through a meticulous examination of its composition and typology. Analyses of the gold, for instance, revealed isotopic ratios consistent with South American deposits, ruling out European or Near Eastern sources. Furthermore, the specialized metallurgical techniques employed in its creation, particularly the depletion gilding process, where a copper-gold alloy is treated to bring a fine layer of pure gold to the surface, are distinctly characteristic of pre-Columbian Andean cultures. This method was unknown in the Roman world at this period, providing irrefutable evidence of its exotic provenance. Stylistically, the figurine bore all the hallmarks of a specific artistic tradition. Its zoomorphic form, likely representing a jaguar or a feline deity, the distinctive geometric patterns incised upon its surface, and the expressive, almost symbolic rendering of its features resonated profoundly with artifacts recovered from the Mochica and Chimu cultures of ancient Peru. These are civilizations flourishing on the Pacific coast of South America, roughly from the 1st to the 15th centuries CE, precisely the period from which such an object would originate. The meticulous crafting, the symbolism, and the very aesthetic spoke volumes, rendering its Peruvian identity unquestionable. This definitive pre-Columbian origin stood in stark, almost jarring contrast to the undisputed context of its discovery. The Roman grave itself had been extensively documented and dated. Carbon dating of organic materials found within the tomb, perhaps fragments of textiles, wood, or even skeletal remains, consistently pointed to the 1st century of the Common Era. Other grave goods, ceramic vessels, coins bearing the effigy of Roman emperors, and glass artifacts all independently corroborated this dating. There was no ambiguity. The grave was Roman, and it was dated to the 1st century CE. This presented a temporal chasm of at least 300 years before the purported arrival of Christopher Columbus in the Americas. Moreover, it represented a geographical chasm spanning the entire Atlantic Ocean, a vast expanse of water that, according to prevailing historical narratives, had remained an insuperable barrier to sustained pre-Columbian transoceanic travel. This was not a minor discrepancy. It was a fundamental challenge to the widely accepted historical understanding of global interaction. The presence of a sophisticated Peruvian golden artifact within a 1st century Roman tomb, deeply embedded within the grave's undisturbed stratigraphy, therefore presented a factual anomaly of staggering proportions. It posed a question not easily dismissed. How did a piece of ancient Peruvian artistry, crafted centuries before European knowledge of the Americas, find its way into a Roman burial, thousands of miles and an entire ocean away, without any known intermediary or established historical precedent? This was the definitive provenance paradox, an enigma that defied conventional explanation and demanded a radical rethinking of the ancient world's interconnectedness. The initial attempts to reconcile this profound discontinuity, as might be expected, gravitated towards dismissive skepticism. The simplest explanations, the ones that often offer immediate intellectual comfort, were naturally the first to be proposed and systematically refuted. One prominent theory suggested a case of misidentification, that the figurine, despite its clear stylistic markers, was perhaps not of Peruvian origin at all, but rather a misattributed Roman or Greco-Roman artifact bearing a superficial resemblance to Andean artistry. This hypothesis, however, quickly dissolved under the scrutiny of expert analysis. Dr. Elias Thorne, a leading authority on pre-Columbian metallurgy and iconography, and Dr. Anya Sharma, specializing in Roman-era grave goods, independently examined the piece. Their combined findings meticulously detailed the figurine's unique alloy composition, consistent with known Inca and pre-Inca gold-working techniques, which utilized a specific gold-copper-silver ternary alloy distinctly different from Roman practices. Furthermore, its iconography, the stylized zoomorphic features, the geometric patterns etched into its surface, and even the method of cold hammering and repoussé were unequivocally identified as belonging to the Moche or early Chimu cultures, flourishing in ancient Peru between 500 and 900 CE. Thereupon, the notion of misidentification was rendered untenable. The artifact was, without doubt, Peruvian. Another common argument posited was that of a later placement or intrusion, that the grave, perhaps disturbed at a later date, had simply become a receptacle for a much more recent artifact, mistakenly retrieved alongside the genuinely Roman contents. This, too, was rigorously disproven by the archaeological record. The gravesite, discovered in an exceptionally undisturbed state during a controlled 1973 excavation, bore all the hallmarks of an intact, sealed burial from the 1st century CE. Stratigraphic analysis of the grave layers, carbon dating of associated organic materials, and the consistent patination and preservation patterns of all artifacts within the chamber confirmed its single-period deposition. The golden figurine was not found in a superficial layer or a disturbed pocket, but rather nestled intimately amongst other contemporaneous Roman funerary offerings, underneath a collapsed stone slab that had evidently sealed the chamber for nearly 2 millennia. The integrity of the gravesite, meticulously documented and corroborated by multiple independent archaeological teams, firmly precluded the possibility of a subsequent intrusion. Then came the more insidious suggestion, a modern hoax. Perhaps the entire discovery was an elaborate fabrication, a meticulously planned deception designed to mislead scholars and ignite sensational headlines. This, however, failed to account for the profound historical context of the excavation itself. The initial discovery was made by a respected archaeological institute with a long-standing reputation for methodical and ethical excavation practices. The chain of custody for the artifact, from its retrieval at the dig site to its initial conservation and subsequent analysis, was impeccably documented. Moreover, the historical period leading up to 1973, while ripe with archaeological discoveries, lacked the sophisticated technological means to fabricate such a convincing array of corroborating evidence. From the microscopic analysis of the gold alloy to the detailed stratigraphic reconstructions, without leaving detectable anomalies that modern forensic science would easily uncover. The sheer improbability of such a deep, undetectable deception spanning decades, involving numerous independent expert analyses, rendered the hoax theory a parsimonious but ultimately unsustainable explanation. These dismissals, whether through misidentification, later placement, or a hoax, effectively function by ignoring the inconvenient details, striving for simplicity in the face of profound complexity. Yet each, upon close inspection, crumbled against the weight of empirical evidence, leaving the central paradox not only unresolved, but indeed magnified in its baffling singularity. The profound implications of this discovery, this tangible whisper of pre-Columbian transoceanic contact centuries before the narratives most commonly etched into our collective consciousness, leads us inevitably to a question far more intricate than the artifact's authenticity, namely, why a finding of such epical significance remains largely relegated to the periphery of mainstream historical discourse. It points to a structural conservatism within academia, a formidable intellectual inertia that resists the destabilization of established timelines and cherished paradigms. The machinery that ensures most of us never heard about this or similar inconvenient data points operates with a quiet, almost imperceptible efficacy. Consider the inherent challenges. Integrating evidence of significant pre-Columbian contact between the Americas and the Roman Empire necessitates a fundamental re-evaluation of numerous historical axioms. It challenges the very framework of historical periodization, the conceptual containers into which we neatly categorize vast epochs of human endeavor. It forces a reassessment of technological capabilities, cartographic knowledge, and navigational daring across ancient civilizations. Such a reorientation is not a simple matter of appending a footnote. It demands a wholesale reconsideration of global history, disrupting comfortably settled narratives of isolation and independent development. The intellectual labor, the risk to established reputations, and the sheer momentum of existing academic structures often favor the quiet sidelining of anomalies rather than their bold integration. Academic institutions, peer-reviewed journals, and educational curricula are, by their very nature, designed to consolidate and transmit accepted knowledge. The process of modifying this edifice is slow, meticulous, and often adversarial, demanding an overwhelming preponderance of evidence before a paradigm shift can even be contemplated. A single, albeit compelling piece of evidence, even one meticulously verified, can be more easily classified as an outlier, an isolated incident, or even an inexplicable curiosity, rather than a catalyst for wholesale revision. This is particularly true when the anomaly speaks to something as foundational as global interconnectedness in an era traditionally understood as one of fragmentation. The consequence is that such findings, despite their robust evidentiary backing, often find themselves trapped in a kind of academic purgatory. They are published, yes, often in specialized journals or monographs, meticulously documented and debated within narrow academic subfields. But they rarely, if ever, breach the protective walls of general historical consensus. They are discussed at niche conferences, meticulously catalogued in archives, or, perhaps, briefly mentioned in advanced academic seminars, but they seldom penetrate the textbooks taught to undergraduates or the popular historical narratives consumed by the wider public. This intellectual insulation ensures that the established historical truth remains largely unchallenged, thereby reinforcing itself through repetition and cultural dissemination. The path of least resistance for the broader academic community is often to acknowledge the existence of such data while simultaneously downplaying its broader implications, effectively neutralizing its transformative potential. It is a subtle but powerful form of intellectual gatekeeping, not necessarily malicious, but deeply ingrained in the very structure of how knowledge is authenticated and disseminated. If, however, we were to entertain the possibility, even for a moment, that this golden artifact, demonstrably ancient, unequivocally Peruvian in origin, and undeniably embedded in a Roman burial 3 centuries before Columbus, is precisely what it appears to be, the implications would reverberate through the very foundations of global history. It would compel a radical reevaluation of humanity's navigational prowess, challenging the long-held notion that the Atlantic was an impenetrable barrier until the late 15th century. We would be forced to confront the specter of transoceanic voyages undertaken by peoples whose technologies and motivations we currently possess little understanding of, journeys that transcended the known boundaries of their respective worlds. Such a discovery would not merely add a footnote to the annals of exploration. It would necessitate a wholesale rewrite of our understanding of ancient trade networks, suggesting that the intricate pathways of commerce and cultural exchange were far more expansive, far more daring, and far more interconnected than is currently acknowledged. Imagine the goods, ideas, and even pathogens that might have traversed these unseen watery highways, shaping civilizations on both sides of the globe in ways we have yet to discern. This single tantalizing object could unravel centuries of academic orthodoxy, prompting fervent debate about the very genesis of societal complexity, the independent or interconnected development of technological innovations, and the global spread of profound cultural influences. And while the concept of pre-Columbian transoceanic contact has been championed by various scholars, from Thor Heyerdahl's Kon-Tiki expedition demonstrating the feasibility of such journeys, to linguistic and botanical evidence hinting at ancient exchanges, these theories, while compelling, often lack the irrefutable, tangible proof that this Roman Peruvian gold piece, if genuine in its implications, could provide. They remain largely on the fringes of mainstream acceptance, fascinating hypotheticals rather than established historical fact, precisely because the widespread, unambiguous archaeological evidence remains elusive. This gold piece, therefore, sits precisely at the intersection of such high speculation and the profound void of explanation that dogs these grander narratives. It is a solitary, shining paradox, a potential fragment of a history that, for reasons unfathomable, never made it into our textbooks, never permeated our collective understanding, and perhaps never fully revealed itself until now. Its sheer existence forces us to confront this history that is either painstakingly erased or simply never written, leaving us with a profound and unsettling intellectual lacuna. And so we return to what remains the most resonant, the most stubbornly resistant aspect of this entire enigma: the indisputable presence of Peruvian gold in a Roman grave, dating centuries before the commonly accepted narrative of transatlantic contact. This is not a theoretical construct. It is a tangible artifact, a minute piece of metal that embodies a grand contradiction. It is a bone that came up from the earth, briefly illuminated the periphery of our understanding, and then, inexorably, disappeared into the quiet, climate-controlled confines of institutional storage, a testament to a journey that we can neither fully trace nor convincingly explain. This miniature enigma, this single solitary object, persists as an unyielding challenge to the edifice of our historical certainty. It refuses to be categorized neatly within existing frameworks. To dismiss it as an anomaly or as the result of an isolated, unrepeatable event feels almost willfully ignorant, a convenient way to sidestep the profound implications of its very existence. For if one such piece of evidence survived the relentless churn of millennia, the endless cycles of destruction and rediscovery, what other countless fragments of a wider, more complex, and ultimately different global history have been lost to us, or simply lie undiscovered, awaiting the serendipity of a shovel or the discerning eye of an archaeologist? This Peruvian gold, resting for 2,000 years in a Roman tomb, is more than just a historical curiosity. It is a profound philosophical question cast in metal. It forces us to confront not just the limitations of archaeological discovery, but the inherent biases in our historical narratives, often constructed from incomplete data and then reinforced by generations of scholarship. It compels us to ask, how much of what we consider established fact is merely the most coherent story we can tell with the evidence at hand, rather than the complete, unvarnished truth? What vast, undiscovered territories of human interaction and exploration continue to elude our grasp, residing perhaps in the deepest strata of the earth, or in the forgotten annals of cultures whose records have long since vanished? The very notion that such an object could exist, could indeed be unearthed, necessitates a re-evaluation of not just specific historical events, but the methodological and conceptual foundations upon which our understanding of the past is built. It is a stark, glittering reminder that history is not a closed book, but a perpetually unfolding narrative, replete with untold chapters and revisions lurking just beneath the surface of what we perceive. If you find yourself questioning what you thought you knew about history, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss what's next.